I'd just like to say that I'm one of the people who has welcomed Kelly J to Tasmania, and we are extremely happy to see her. It may not be obvious here. I want to talk about why there are men in women's prisons, why our transgender laws allow fully intact males in women's prisons to rape and bash women. When we started off this process with the transgender laws, what happened is that our government here did not consult with anybody except for the trans people. So most of the Tasmanian population knows next to nothing about what happened. My focus is on prisoners because how prisoners are tells you a lot about democracy and whether we have one here, because we don't.
Get a bit closer to the mic.
Sure. So how did we get here? We got here because the Tasmanian government put through a package of laws without bothering to talk to anybody about it, and those laws have taken away the sex-based rights of women. Those laws have also taken away the rights of lesbians to meet together. These people here shouting, they don't give a shit about women, and they don't give a shit about women prisoners. When we started this process here, the first thing I did was have a bit of a Google. It took me 2 minutes to find a case in the UK where a man who was already a convicted sex offender was on remand for stabbing his neighbour and for rape. And the board that those people have to decide where a prisoner goes put him in the women's prison. And when he was in the women's prison, he was there for 3 months. He raped multiple women. Later on, he admitted to 2 of those rapes. But that's what these laws do.
Disgrace! You all support that disgrace!
At the beginning of the process here, there were child safety experts, there were women talking about women's rights, I was talking about prisons, and we had nobody listening to us at all. So what I'm worried about in prisons is that we have state-sponsored rape of women, state-sponsored bashing of women, and I don't know if any have died yet, but somebody will soon, and I want to stop that happening. And we can do 2 things to stop that. One is to look at the Anti-Discrimination Act, which discriminates against more people than it helps, and put the word sex in there. As a woman, I need protection under the law because of my sex. Gender doesn't come into it. If women prisoners have the protection of an Anti-Discrimination Act that protects women because of our sex, then those women prisoners will have a chance of arguing against fully intact males being parked in the cell next to them. The other thing that has established the capacity of fully intact males to rape women prisoners is the self-ID situation. Because any man, whoever he is, can decide that he is a woman and be put in the women's prison if he applies. Most women who identify as males don't bother to apply. So let me tell you about prison. Prison is a shit of a place to be. There's rotten food, rotten healthcare. You can't complain about anything. If you complain, you can get extended sentences, you'll lose your capacity to get out earlier, and so on. It's impossible for women to complain about these intact males who are there. The other side of this experience for women prisoners is that the other side of this for women prisoners is that when men come into a women's prison, it makes an enormous difference. Prison is a situation where there are very, very large differences between men and women, and you cannot ignore those differences. Men commit virtually all of the crimes of violence, like these people like. Men commit all the sex crimes, virtually. Women don't. So we have different prisons for men and for women for very good reasons. As soon as you put men in women's prisons, the whole atmosphere changes. When I was in prison, I kept meeting a lot of women who had absolutely no self-esteem and were struggling. If you put men in those prisons, those women will never have a chance. That's right. Most women in Australia's prisons have been sexually assaulted as children, most before the age of 5. They're the women who are really vulnerable. But these young people have no idea what's going on, and you can tell they don't. But they need to think about what all this means in terms of the law. Okay. Men have to stay out of women's prisons. That's what our laws are saying is okay. And the Tasmanian government supports men in women's prisons raping and bashing women. This is not a government I want to have. But there's a positive side to this whole thing, and that is that in Scotland, the leader of the Scottish government resigned when she came up against the fact that everybody could see that women in prison were going to be raped. And we need to continue that process and force people politically to see the obvious. I'll stop there.